Well, today we finish our first sewing project. We complete this pair of shorts. I show you how to make the little fly stitching the easiest way possible. We put the elastic casing in and the elastic, and we even sew a button on. So stay tuned and see how this all comes together. All right, although the instructions are not totally clear, I know that what they are telling me is I need to fold down my elastic casing. Now you remember we marked that with a slight notch right there. So I've got my here, that is an inch down. So if I decide I need to, I can use that, my hem gauge here to press that down. I think I'll be fine though without it. So I've got my iron nice and hot again. Remember, keep your fingers back, and if you've got one of these, they are great. I have saved my fingertips many times by using the little silicone tip. Especially on doll clothes where you do need to get really close. And again this week I apologize for the ironing board wiggling. Not really anything I can do about that since I have to have the camera up on the ironing board. Alright, now we're going to move to the sewing machine and do some sewing. Alright, hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing from that angle. Once again, if you guys have any better ideas for how to angle the camera, let me know. So we are going to sew along that edge we just pressed down. I've turned these kind of wrong side out. Now we are going to sew 1/4 inch from the raw edge. This is the raw edge. Let's see, where's the camera? This is the raw edge. This is where we just folded it. So we are going to sew along there. In fact, I'm going to make it a little closer than 1/4 inch just to give me a little more space for my elastic. And I don't feel the need to backstitch because the ends will be sewn across later. So I'm not going to backstitch there. That just adds extra bulk. Try to remain as straight as you can. But remember, if you matched your thread to your fabric pretty well, it won't show up a lot. So this is a good way to practice. I'm trying to manipulate this so it will still go straight. You may have to turn things around back and forth as you go, just to get everything where it's not getting run over with the sewing machine, because you don't want to sew the wrong spot. And now we have a casing for our elastic. Let me turn the camera off and get you up where you can see better, and we'll go to the next step. Alright, now it's time to put the elastic in the waistband of our shorts. And this is a spot where I am varying slightly from what the pattern calls for. The pattern calls for 1/2 inch elastic. I'm going to use 3/8 inch. There's 2 reasons why I'm using 3/8 inch. Number one, and most importantly, it's what I have on hand. I thought I had 1/2 inch elastic, but I don't. I'm out. But secondly, because in my opinion, 3/8 inch is better in scale. Because when you take that times 3, 1/2 inch elastic would be an 1.5 inch wide waistband, where 3/8 inch would be just over an inch wide waistband. So they're both fine. You can always go narrower on your elastic without adjusting your pattern, in most cases anyway. But you can't go wider without making an adjustment in your pattern. If it called for 3/8 inch, you wouldn't be able to substitute 1/2 inch without making some adjustments. And this is a brand new package, so I need to open it up. I am going to cut myself a nice new end. And then the pattern says, let me reach for the pattern. The pattern tells me that I need to cut a 13¼ inch piece of elastic. So I've got my tape measure here, and I'm going to cut a 13¼ inch piece. Now don't pull it. Let it be not stretched at all when you're measuring. Oops. The scissors were laying underneath my box of thread. There we go. So this is our piece of elastic we'll be working with. Now, I'm going to show you my way of putting elastic in, and I think it's the easiest. It requires 2 safety pins, any size, that will go through your casing. Put one on each end. So one there, and one there. That way you've got basically these become your handles. You can't use any wider of a one than this because it wouldn't fit through. Now you go to the opening on your waistband, and if I had it up where I could see it, it would be much easier, and you're going to go through. I put the safety pin on the front on this end to pull it through with. I put it on this end to keep it from being pulled all the way through because I don't want it to pull all the way through. And when you come to your seam allowance, you're going to have to kind of wiggle around because it's going to try to go underneath. You're going to have to kind of wiggle it around until you get underneath, in between there. So I'm going to turn the camera, oh, there it goes. I was going to say I could turn the camera off and fiddle with this, but it's going. So I will turn the camera off, get this all the way around, and then I'll be back. All right, now the elastic is all the way through. You keep these safety pins on until you have anchored it with the sewing machine. But before I do that, I want to try this on the doll and make sure it's going to fit. Some dolls are going to be fatter than others. Some are going to be skinnier. So just slip it onto your doll. That's why it's important to have a doll on hand. Each brand of doll is a little different in its size, and even within the brands. So I pull this up, I overlap about where it goes, and this is going to be a pretty good fit. So I can see it fits around the waist. So I can take them back off, and I'm going to move the camera back to the sewing machine, and we will anchor this and go on to our next step. All right, before you take that safety pin off, make sure the safety pin is out of the way, and you're only going through, I've got the fabric down straight. I'm going to make a seam, and I'll show you where it is, across the end of the elastic and the fabric. That way it anchors my elastic. Make sure that that safety pin is nowhere near your needle though. Keep that in a safe distance. You can go back and forth a couple of times. Now, see, I made a seam right there. Oh, where's the camera? There's a seam right there. So now I can take the safety pin off, and my elastic is not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other end, and then I'll be back. All right, the next thing the pattern tells me to do is to make sure that all the fullness from the elastic is in the back. And at the side seam, I'm going to stitch right along the side seam, which means I want to first put my glasses on. Second, I want to center my needle so that I can see. And I'm going to sew right in the side seam. That will keep the elastic fullness to the back of the shorts and not to the front. There. And there, you see my seam is, the stitching I did is right where the seam is. So on the other side, I'm going to work that back. So there's not much gathering in the front. Most of the gathering is behind the waist, behind the side seams. Again, down, and go down the side seam, just enough to cross the elastic, and then back up. There. No one will even notice that stitching, but it will hold all the gathering for the elastic in the back side of the pants. Let me trim these threads, and I'll be back. All right, so now we need to, one of the things we are going to do today is we are going to do the top stitching on our fly front. This is only done on the left side of the front. And you can transfer this marking. There's lots of ways to transfer the marking. I've got a shortcut. This is my favorite way to do this. This is a piece, this is actually parchment paper from my kitchen. You can use pretty much anything, any paper that is clean that you can see through enough to see the markings. And I'm pinning this on. I'm trying to line up the top of the piece of paper with the top of my pattern piece as best I can. And I'm not pinning where there are lines. Now I may not be able to do this all under the camera because I'm probably going to need to get my head down closer in order to see what I'm doing. But what I'm basically going to do, I'm going to trace this front line, and I'm using a pencil just in case these markings come off on my fabric. Pencil won't hurt my fabric. If I used ink and this somehow got damp, it could make a stain on my fabric. So I'm very careful what I use. Pencil writes really well on this, and it will not make a mark on my fabric that will hurt it. Now I'm following that curve. This is my stitching line. But I'm also marking the center front line. There's that dot that we transferred. And I'm also going to mark the pattern piece, the outline. And I'm going to make a light mark where that fold line is. There, see, you got to see the whole thing. So now, when we're ready to do the top stitching, I'll show you how this works. All right, I went through and I traced over these lines to the back side of my parchment paper. I've also pinned back the right side front on the pants. That way it's out of the way. I don't want to accidentally sew that. Now these get folded back, and this gets pinned right here. So I'm lining up this line here with the fold with the top of the shorts. It's kind of hard to do where you guys can see and I can see too. In there, and I'm going to put another pin down here. Now we're just going to leave this paper on here. We're going to put it in the sewing machine, and I'm going to follow this line here all the way down, and it will hopefully catch the inside. So let me move you back to your candle holder. We'll sew that, and then I'll put you back up here again. All right, I've got this lined up, so my needle is on the line. I took a photo. I'll try to remember to put it in the blog post. We're just going to follow that line that we drew. Now I want to get that pin out of there so I don't poke myself with it. And I'm going to back up. Now for beginning sewers, just sew it with a regular stitch. On later projects, I'll show you some other fun stitches you can use for top stitching that will be a little bit fancier looking, I guess. Now when we get to the corner, now you don't have to stay exactly on the line, just stay really close. Now when you get to the corner and the line starts to bend, lift your presser foot and turn your fabric just a little bit. Take a stitch or two, and depending on how curved you're making your curve here, and it doesn't have to be perfectly on that pencil line. That's okay if it's not. I'm going to turn it this way, and I'm going to go this, and I'm going straight across, off the fabric, and back. Just a couple of stitches, and cut the thread. Get the pin out, and let's see if I can tear the paper off, because I got one more stitching I want to do before I move it back up to the top. And just tear that paper out. Now, we're going to do one more line of stitching. I'm going to make a top stitching line right here along this edge. I think that'll make it look a little more finished. And I'm going to go close as I can without going off the edge. And I'm making sure that I have the fabric pushed back so I don't catch anything I don't want to have sewn in this. When I get to the end, I'm going to stop and take a photo before I take the fabric out. So I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to finish this and I'll move you back up to the tripod. All right, now I'm not sure how well the camera's picking it up, but there's a line of top stitching here that makes our curve, and then there's a straight line right along the edge. And on the back, you can see it caught the fabric, so it held it back. Unpin that, and now I just need to go dig out a decorative button so I can sew a button on the front. I need to trim that thread. I missed that one. I swear I spend most of my time cutting threads that are left over. All right, I'm going to go find a button for the front of this, and I'll show you how to sew that on. All right, now we're going to put the button on. So I've lined this up and I've pinned it just to keep this, because we're going to sew the button through both those layers, and that's a lot of layers. You're actually going through 6 layers of fabric and 2 layers of elastic at this point. So be careful, but it's not too difficult. It's doable. You just have to be really careful. I've got a needle threaded, and it's got a knot on the end. I'm going to trim my thread a little closer to my knot so I don't have a big tail hanging off. And I want to center my button kind of in this little square that's formed. Top stitching, and top stitching. So I want to kind of center the button there. So I'm going to come up just through this part first on my first. That way my initial knot is kind of buried in the middle. Now through my button. Make sure you know if your button has a definite right side, top side, and bottom side. Be sure you line that up right. Back through the hole and back through all the layers of fabric. Pulling the needle and pulling your threads tight. And I went through the hole across from the one I came up in. Now we're going to go back up. And we're going to come back up through the same hole we came up through the first time. Through all 6 layers of fabric, all the layers, and back down. And we're going to do that several times. Through the same hole. This would be so much easier if I had my head where if I had this closer to me. So I'm going to go ahead and get the first hole, this first set of holes sewn through, and then I'll be right back. Oh, all right. I've gone through about 4 or 5 times now. So I've got a nice set of threads there. I think hopefully the camera can see that. Now we're going to turn this to the inside. We're actually going to knot off our thread. So you're going to go through the fabric. You're going to have a loop here. This loop of thread around my finger. I'm going to put my needle through there twice and pull it. And now I can cut my thread off. Now I'm going to wet my finger so I can get a knot made. Tie another knot at the end of my thread. And those other 2 holes that we didn't go through earlier, oh, we can take this pin out. We don't need that now. We're going to come up through that top hole and go down through this one. And back up and down, and I'm going to do that 4 or 5 more times, and when I get that all sewn on, I'll be right back. All right, I went through a few more times. Now we're going to go back through a final time. And again, I'm going to tie off my thread the same way I did before. Now this way of sewing a button on isn't necessarily needed for this application, since it's never going to actually be buttoned and unbuttoned. It's just how I sew a button on every time. All right, we have the button sewn on our shorts. So let me go, well, in fact, I'll just reach over here. Hopefully I can reach the doll. And she can wear the shorts under her dress here for a moment. We can kind of see what they look like. I will find a shirt to put on her temporarily and take some photos for the blog and for the beginning of the video, but pull these on over her little butt. We have made a pair of shorts, and they fit her and they look really nice. So that's how those go together. I hope you've enjoyed this. Next week, we will start the t-shirt that goes with this. So I'm glad you joined me. Be sure and ask any questions either in the comments here, on the blog post, or on the Facebook, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.